Hey guys, so today we're going to be going over epistemology. What is knowledge? So there are three types of knowledge. We have practical knowledge, and this is knowledge how. We have knowledge by acquaintance, which is knowledge of. We have propositional knowledge, which is knowledge that. Zagzebski argues that there are basically nature of definitions, and these definitions depend on the different natures of the concepts involved. So some objects have a real essence, basically meaning that they have a real underlying cause that makes the thing the way it is. So for example, water would have a real essence because of its chemical composition H2O. And in contrast, weeds don't have a real essence because they have no real definition. There's no underlying cause that would make weeds weeds. Definitions also differ in the role that causes play. Some emphasize the cause of the thing being defined, whereas others do not. For example, the definition of a sunburn will not just outline the symptoms, but also what caused the sunburn, which would be UV light. Zagzebski also gives us some pitfalls to avoid, so stating that definitions shouldn't be circular, meaning they shouldn't include a term being defined. They shouldn't be obscure. They shouldn't be negative, so defining the term by what it is not. And ad hoc, basically meaning coming up with a definition that is specific to meeting a particular problem. Sorry, I didn't mean to put a P, I meant to put a C. Okay, next we're going to look at the tripartite view. So, it's basically saying that in order for knowledge to be true, it has to be A, justified, B, true, and C, a belief. Okay, so Plato tries to work out the difference between someone having a true belief and someone having knowledge. So imagine traveling to town with a guide who knows the way. In this case, the guide is a good one. But equally, if you were traveling with a guide who merely guessed the way, then she too would be a good guide. In both cases, you end up in the right town. If my beliefs are true, then they are useful to me as knowledge. Then they are just as useful to me as knowledge. So why should we prefer knowledge over true belief? So Plato says that part of the reason we value knowledge more is because it's backed up by evidence. Evidence acts as a glue, which retains belief in the mind by giving good reason to continue believing it. For example, sometimes a jury might find a man guilty correctly, but for poor reasons, such as guessing. So you would not say that this jury knew that the man was guilty. So not every case of true belief is a case of knowledge. Plato's point is basically that we can hold true belief, but we would be reluctant to call them knowledge because of the nature of the evidence supporting them. So knowledge is a justified true belief. Okay, so next we're going to look at necessary and sufficient conditions. So a necessary condition is basically something you need in order to have the thing in question. So, for example, water is a necessary condition of rain. And then the sufficient condition, when met, you will always have that thing in question. So, for example, being an aunt is a sufficient condition for having relatives. Some conditions are both necessary and sufficient. For example, being unmarried and being a man are both the necessary and sufficient conditions for being a bachelor. Now we're going to look at some issues with the tripartite view. So we're going to look at the belief condition first. So we're going to say, can you have knowledge without belief? It's incoherent to say, I know that it is raining, but I do not believe it. Or for example, you might hesitantly answer the correct answer to a quiz question, having been taught it correctly but not remembering being taught. Some would argue that you knew it even if you did not really believe it. Some also claimed that belief and knowledge are different mental states. Plato argued that knowledge entails belief, but later claimed that they are separate. He reasoned that since knowledge is infallible and belief is fallible, they must be fundamentally different ways of apprehending the world. Knowledge involves going beyond mere belief. The truth condition. Can you have knowledge without truth? So, a cave woman believes the world is flat, based on evidence available at the time. Whether she knew the earth was flat depends on how we define truth. So there are two kinds of truth. We have correspondence theory of truth, and this says that the truth consists in a correspondence between a claim and a relevant fact. And so the claim that the world is flat does not correspond with the fact, so it is not true. However, there is also coherence theory of truth, and this is basically proposing that a belief is true if it has one of the webs of beliefs held by a society to be true. And so the cave woman does have JTB because at the time people did believe that the world was flat. What about the justification condition? So, reliabilism claims that knowledge is a true belief that has been reliably generated. A conscious justification may not be necessary. So, for example, John has a rare gift. If you give him any date in the future, he will be able to tell you what day of the week this will be. He is unable to say how he does this, although he is incredibly accurate. How John gets the answer right is a mystery, but he is very reliable, therefore justification may not always be necessary for knowledge. So all these three things then raise the question, are the JTV conditions jointly sufficient? So if you have all the conditions, justification, truth, belief, are you guaranteed knowledge? Next, we're going to look at some Gettier counter examples. The first example is the job. So, it goes, Smith and Jones are both going for a job. Smith has strong evidence that Jones will get the job. For example, he overhears. Smith also has strong evidence that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. Smith forms the belief that the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket, but as it turns out, Smith gets the job. By coincidence, Smith also has 10 coins in his pocket. Now, Smith's belief was both true and justified. But the problem with this is that it only turned out to be luckily true. So this was due to luck, and it was just a coincidence. So is this knowledge? The second Gettier example is Brown in Barcelona. So, Smith has evidence that his friend Jones owns a Ford. Smith has another friend named Brown. He has no evidence of his whereabouts. Smith forms the disjunctive belief that Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Barcelona. As it turns out, Jones no longer owns the car, but by coincidence, Brown is in Barcelona. Next, we're going to look at fake Barn County. So, Barney is unknowingly driving through a fake Barn County. He looks to the side and sees a big red barn. Based on this, he believes there is a big red barn by the road. It happens to be the only real barn in the whole area. This justification is not false in any way, but the believer doesn't know that they are in an unusual context, which makes their belief seem luckily true. Some ways which we can respond to issues with the tripartite view is to remove the element of luck, to claim that knowledge can only be allowed if the belief is infallible. Infallibilism is the theory that we can only count things as knowledge that we cannot rationally doubt. So, for example, 2 + 2 = 4. Price cites the example of pain. So, when you are in pain, you know that you are in pain. It makes no sense to say that you believe that you're in pain, as you know you are. Someone else may observe you and infer that you're in pain. In this case, the person would hold a belief about your pain. But they would not know that you're in pain, as there is a possibility of an alternative explanation. For example, you could be faking it. But there is no possibility of you being wrong about your pain, so you know that you are in pain. A criticism against infallibilism is that it goes against our intuition, that basically we know a lot of things, and it implies that we have very little knowledge. Next, we're going to look at no false lemmas. So, a lemma is a premise accepted as true in an argument. It argues that in Gettier's 2 scenarios, the justification includes a false lemma, and so shouldn't be considered examples of knowledge. This theory seems reasonable, as in most cases when we justify a belief using a false lemma, the belief itself turns out to be false. However, a criticism of this, it is not clear that a false belief was involved. For example, in the fake barn county, Barney sees a barn and forms a belief that it is a barn, so there is no false belief. Next, we're going to look at reliabilism. Reliability is based on the truth for giving. So, for example, we trust a source of a quality newspaper article over gossip. Likewise, with your belief, we should only grant status of knowledge to those beliefs that have been formed by a reliable cognitive process. For example, like seeing, hearing, that are highly, so seeing things up close. So, some advantages of replacing J with R is with animals. So using the JCB account, animals are unlikely to have knowledge, as they cannot justify their beliefs. However, RTB might claim that animals have evolved to have reliable processes of vision, meaning that they can interact successfully with the world and therefore have knowledge about it. Also, we have cognitive science. So instead of philosophers giving internal accounts, of which justifications are good ones, scientists can give external accounts of neurological processes that lead to true belief. A criticism of reliabilism is that it doesn't give an adequate account of the relationship between our beliefs and our justifications. So, for example, the brain in a vat experiment. Barney sees a barn is reliably produced, but luckily true. So, RTB account is no better than the JCB account for Gettier cases. How can we patch up reliabilism? So what we can do is redefine a process. So for example, the second Gettier example could be described as a case inferring from a false belief, Jones owns a Ford, to a new belief. Inferring from a false belief is not a reliable process. And with fake barn county, it could be re-described as a case of visual identification in highly deceptive circumstances. Another way that we could patch up reliabilism is with no relevant alternatives. Goldman suggests that we should only count a process as reliable if it can distinguish between the truth and other relevant possibilities. In fake county, Barney is able to distinguish between seeing a real barn and fake barn. And the answer is probably not, and therefore this belief was not formed by a reliable process. Next, we're going to look at virtue epistemology, so replacing J with V. It basically states that an act of knowledge occurs when the belief is successful and when its success stems from an intellectual virtue. The tendency to use a reliable process is an intellectual virtue, and a tendency to use an unreliable process is an intellectual vice. It claims knowledge is a true belief brought about by a virtuous true belief. Next, we're going to look at Sosa's AAA rating. So in accurately shooting an arrow, Sosa identifies 3 key elements. Number 1 is accuracy. Whether it hits the target, and even luckily so, and in the same way, a belief is accurate if it's true. Number 2, adroitness. This is how skillful it was, even if it misses. An adroit belief is one formed by an intellectual virtue, even if not true. And number 3 is aptness. One that is accurate because it was adroit. An apt belief is one that is true because it was formed with an intellectual virtue. So in this case, a AAA rating rejects Gettier, but it accepts fake Barn County. Sosa suggests that Barney actually does have a form of knowledge. He has animal knowledge. To have human knowledge requires the believer to have awareness about how apt their belief is. But Barney, who is unaware he's in a fake Barn County, has an apt belief where he doesn't have reflective human knowledge. He cannot tell whether his belief is apt or not.